Delighted to be joined right now by the Sun's TV critic and columnist Ali Ross to talk about, that man who's been in the news all week, Mr. Gregg Wallace. Good morning to you, Ali.
Hi, Julia. Just enjoying your Schadenfreude at Michel Barnier's expense.
I'm terrible. I'm a bad human being. What can I say? But not as bad as someone's alleging that Gregg Wallace is. Now, you've been a TV critic for years. I've got to be honest. I've probably watched one episode of MasterChef in my life. Not been a big fan of Gregg Wallace. Find him a bit pompous and boorish and boring. Not my issue. I couldn't give two hoots whether that show is on air or not on air. But not only has there been this big outcry about his behaviour that he's been accused of, we don't know whether it all happened or not, but this outcry of whether or not the BBC should even have MasterChef on TV last night or have the Christmas special. What do you make of that particular row?
It's weird, isn't it? The BBC's very, very good at telling the rest of the world how to behave. Less good at behaving itself. And it's always a sense with these things that here we are again, and I guarantee we'll be having probably a similar conversation about someone else next year, because the response is always the same. Robust processes are in place. Well, are they? No one seems to know what they are, because this has been going on for about 15 years or more.
Well, that's what's claimed. I do feel I need to do this, because I'm not a fan, especially after Me Too, of this sort of trial by media, and a lot of our audience are complaining about this. But when there's enough women who've never even probably met each other, who've been contacted by newspapers and TV companies who are saying, well, yeah, this did happen, and apparently a lot of it, filmed and on the cutting room floor in front of a lot of people, it makes you think that, there's no smoke without fire here, at least.
Well, that's always the case with anything legal. Is if there's a pattern of behaviour, then you tend to say, okay, we've got a problem here that clearly needs to be addressed, but not by the way the BBC do it. Because I would imagine even the person who wrote the robust processes couldn't tell you exactly what they are.
But we know that certainly there was a meeting that Gregg Wallace had. We know this, a senior executive at the BBC in charge of sort of non-scripted programming. She held a meeting with Gregg Wallace where it was apparently a 90-minute meeting behind closed doors where these issues and complaints were raised with him. So it's been raised with him. We understand that's not the only time. The BBC were aware. He was aware that women were uncomfortable with his behaviour, whether they were contestants on the show, celebrity contestants, ordinary contestants, or production staff, particularly junior women. And it does appear that everything just carried on. Now, a lot of people are saying that actually this was the norm at Banijay UK, the production company, and no one really batted an eyelid. But this is the really bizarre thing. Look, this may have been quite normal. I mean, I'm old enough, not enough to remember the workplaces a long time ago. Must have been quite normal many years ago. It's certainly not been normal in most workplaces in the last 20 years. But apparently it was on the MasterChef set.
Yeah, and indeed, I think the Inside the Factory set, which I'm guessing you haven't watched either, but to watch it is to cringe at the guy's behaviour. He has this
even the stuff on air, you mean?
Yeah, he has this weird version of bonhomie that just makes your flesh crawl, and you think he cackles like a madman at his own jokes as well, and you think, well, if that's the stuff that's going out, what the hell aren't we seeing?
Yeah.
And
now it's been alleged, hasn't it?
What we're not seeing this past week and a half, which, just to flag up my own industry here, has not come from the BBC. It's because of yet another newspaper investigation.
Yeah, it's a Telegraph,
as it did with Hugh Edwards with The Sun.
Yeah.
This never comes from the BBC. They have to be hauled kicking and screaming before they start talking about workplace reviews again.
Yeah. Now, their defence is, and it's a fair one, they don't make the sodding show. They buy off an independent production company, and it's their responsibility. But most of us would think of him as a BBC star. I find it extraordinary. These incredibly highly paid stars and these incredibly highly paid executives can't see the damage that's coming down the road when enough, high-profile women with their own voices, their own incomes, who aren't going to be worried about whether or not Gregg Wallace wants to be cross with them if they speak out. When they make complaints, what are the odds they're not going to go public with it at some point? Why don't they ever get ahead of this? Because And why don't they want to get ahead of it, given that we've seen what happened with Me Too, we've seen what's happened with far more serious allegations, and it's important not to say that, you know, Gregg Wallace has been accused of anything like, you know, the Jimmy Savile stuff, you know,
exactly,
Hugh Webbers or anything like that. We're talking about a completely different level of stuff. But we have seen, you know, trial by media before and people being found completely guilty. We've also seen people who've got away with things for decades, which have been incredibly abusive. Is there a problem at the BBC, or is it a problem in the media, in the celeb world? What is the issue?
Well, it's probably a bit of everything. We mentioned earlier the hypocrisy, but it's also a bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And that is a lethal combination for any sort of complaint. Pick up the phone about a programme you haven't enjoyed at the BBC and watch your complaint vanish into thin air, never to be heard of again.
Yeah.
And I'm sure somewhere down the line someone is looking at your angry email or hearing your phone call, but for all the action that's taken, you might as well be barking at the moon, which is my guess is what has gone on here.
Yeah. But it's interesting also if you make a complaint about a BBC show, and I don't like people complaining about a show they just didn't like. I mean, you know, I only think people need to get a life, frankly. But those complaints only go to the BBC, not to Ofcom first, don't they? And that's where they disappear into the ether. Do you think that the Christmas special will be on? Do you think that Gregg Wallace will return? Because my view is that, frankly, you know, I think he's probably been banged to rights and some of this because of the scale of the allegations.
Well,
but it's not the worst thing.
Either.
No, exactly. And they talk about women just like me, who obviously does have an issue with. But my view is if he apologises and he stops doing it, that should be the end of the matter and he should carry on with his job. Would that be good enough? Do you think that'll happen?
I don't think it will happen. I think he's probably talked himself out of a career at this stage. But you've got to remember also, it's not David Attenborough we're losing here. It's the bold greengrocer from MasterChef. So he is perfectly replaceable.
Meow, Ali Ross. Thank you very much indeed. It's a harsh but fair point. I have to say, in no way will it impact my life. I just don't like cancellations. I don't like people being cancelled for wrongdoing unless it's actually criminal wrongdoing, and that's not, you know, what he's facing. But anyway,